All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. And we're going to be looking at lesson 4, which is all about microclimate assessment. And we're going to also look at mapping the current zones on your project site. So a little bit to cover this morning, but hopefully by the end of the call, everybody is feeling good about lesson number 4. So let us take a look at what's going on there. And what I'm going to do here is just share my screen. And where are we? There we are. Yeah, so let's take a look at the assignment. So lesson 4, yeah, we have 2 parts to this, and we have the microclimate assessment, which is a very interesting exercise to go through, as I'm sure you're all going to see. And part of this microclimate assessment is selecting 5 existing plants that are on your project site. So, and within those, we would like to see at least 1 tree and 1 shrub. If those are on your site, there undoubtedly would be a few exceptions to that. An urban lot that, say, has been cleared for building that might not have tree or shrub on it, but for the most part, everybody should fall into that category. Let us take a look here. I'm not sure why, but my cursor is misbehaving, so I'm going to just switch over here. Under device. There we go. All right. Yeah, so again, we're looking at microclimate specifically, and they obviously are going to play into our final design here, especially when we start looking at placing plants within the landscape. But even prior to that, they're going to have a big influence on certain landscape elements that you may want to place within your design here. So probably one of the easiest things to do. Well, let's finish taking a look at the assessment itself. So it's all about identifying specific places within your project site, and do try and make sure that every area within your project site has some designation. So for those on larger sites, that might be a little bit trickier, but what you may want to consider, because I know we have at least one student here with 100 acres or more, is just be a little more broad with your well, you have to be a little bit more broad in determining what these microclimates might be, just from the resolution of the drawing, right? So another thing here that we are going to be looking at, of course, is the plants that are within that project site, and a little bit of information here as to what we are looking at or looking for in terms of information on all those plants. So we want to get and try and do this as much as you can, is work in the scientific names of each of those plants. Another, that's synonymous with botanical names. And funny enough, when I started my landscape career, that is really what I focused on completely, because that was, in my opinion, the only way to accurately identify plants one from another. You can't just call it a rose or a rhododendron, because there are just hundreds, if not thousands, of individual varieties and species. So using the scientific names is a great idea. And if anything, at this point in my work life, I'm probably weaker on common names. So it's kind of worked out kind of funny that way. But yeah, do try and embrace this as much as you can. And for those who really want to dive into plants and learn more about them, there's just plenty of resources online to explore. And there's some really good books too. And there's one I'll try and find a bit later here, but it was really helpful for me early in my career in that it basically told or assisted me in pronunciation, because some of those, it's botanical Latin. Some of it can be a little bit tricky. So we want to have any information that you collect on plants, we want to sort of cross-check that. So you want to make sure that you're getting different sources on each individual plant, as well as a primary source. And there's a SWOT analysis here, of course. So some of the elements that you want to include, of course, is the microclimate map. So every area of the map should have a designation, and just keep that in the back of your mind. All of these should be included within a key or some sort of legend, and the 5 plants identified, and some sort of microclimate plant identification chart, as well as attributes. So let's take a look at an example here that we can follow. Excuse me. Yeah, so this is a microclimate section, and this student's microclimate map is shown here. The base plan has been grayed out, and then this color fill has been placed over. And you can see at the same time, this person has identified 7 plants. So you certainly don't have to do that. 5 is great. And within this, let me just see. It doesn't look like they actually identified a tree, although we have shrubs here. So that may have been a previous requirement that was not included, because you'll probably notice some of the examples may be a little bit different than your template file, because this template file does get updated with each class. We tend to do a little bit of refining to it. So sometimes these examples don't reflect it totally. I like the way this is set up in that we have the plant listed and then the microclimate attribute. And then we carry over onto the second sheet here, where again, we're listing all the plants that are on the microclimate map, as well as some information about those, some sources, and a sample of other existing species that are found on the site. So that's also a very interesting thing to have. And, the reality is, if you were providing a design for a client, you do really want to document the significant existing plants. So this is a good exercise to go through, in that you don't necessarily have to go to this degree, but you do want to know what you have to work with, because often you're having to integrate existing plants into a design. So you're really renovating rather than a new build, so to speak. Yeah, and then we go to the attributes table here. So we're looking at the microclimates themselves. And you can see we're looking at sun and moisture and temperature and wind and the plants that are found within those, and any features that are found within that. So that's pretty straightforward. And then the SWOT analysis. So going through the microclimate section, what strengths and weaknesses kind of stood out for you, and some of the opportunities and threats. And then, of course, you have a feedback and Q&A section here that you're quite welcome to fill out. There's a number of ways you can get questions to me, but this is certainly one of them. What I might just throw out there, because I've noticed on a couple of occasions, what's happened is somebody will post a question, but if you do that, try and ensure you're sharing your document to allow for comments, because that is a great place for me to place it so that it's kind of permanently there for you. No big deal if you don't. I'll put it in your video feedback, but that would be one suggestion I have. So that's pretty much the microclimate map. And I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. If you do, you can certainly chime in now or put it in the chat, whatever you'd like to do. If not, we will motor along here to the next section where we're looking at current zones. There we go. And while both of these are important elements to include in a design, or at least, if not presented to your client, at least you've got this as part of your site analysis, the current zones are really one of the things that the permaculture design process integrates into its process that is fantastic. It's something that we don't find in traditional landscape design, but when you start to dive into the importance of the zones and not so much how many zones you might have or how they're arranged, because we're looking at current zones here, and this can actually tell us quite a bit. But when we start to go into that design process of adding elements, we want to make sure we're placing them in an appropriate zone, right? So this will always be a really good map to reference when we're looking at things like, well, simple things like, say, a chicken coop or a clothesline or something that you would need to visit regularly, or perhaps something you don't need to visit much at all. And the way these zones are laid out on your project site will definitely influence how you go forward with this. So you may also find when you get to the end of this exercise that the existing conditions aren't quite right. And I've seen this before on a couple of projects that we've been involved with. One was a site that I guess was about 2 or 3 acres, and the homeowner had their chicken coop right at the back of the property. So it was probably, a good 300 or 400 feet to get from the house to the chicken coop. And that's, not something I would recommend. Not that I would be certainly against going for a nice walk, but it doesn't make sense when you add up that you got to go there 2 or 3 times a day. And in the summer, it's beautiful, but in the winter, not so much, perhaps. Not only that, you want to be able to keep your eye on anything that's going on. Perhaps you have some predator pressure, that sort of thing. But that's just one example. And again, when you go through this process, some elements that are on your project site already, they may kind of jump out at you that, wow, this is not ideal, and I need to consider shifting it or revisiting it in some manner. It also really dictates how you move through the site and your pathways through that. So again, we've discovered that on our property. We're in the midst of a renovation right now, and we had part of our property, the access was quite poor, so we didn't visit it very often, and we've made some changes to that, which I may show you a couple pictures a little bit later on if we have some time. But this, again, is a very, very useful exercise to go through. So elements that we want to see included are that north arrow. You know, this is standard pretty much for every design sheet you're going to put together. You want to have an arrow, you want to have a title. You know the design needs to have some title. Your name needs to be there. There's obviously some other items. If you can put a scale in there, that's great. Every area should have some designation. They should make sense with how human interaction is taking place. And again, this is current. So this is not necessarily where you're going to end up, but at the moment, this is how the site is utilized. A little bit of an explanation about each zone and the human pathways that, you know, how people move through the site, how do cars come on and off the site, and the frequency. And then gates and doorways are also really helpful to have there. And then, of course, we have a SWOT analysis. And if we don't have to go there, but you can see both maps have an equal value to them. So that sort of designates their level of importance. And on this page, we also have some resources, just a little bit of resource there, an plant identification chart, and then the rubric is here. So do check out the rubric. I definitely encourage everybody as they're putting their assignment together, just make sure you have all these items within your drawing. Because this is what I use during my grading process. So let's go back to that example and just take a look at the current zones. So again, we have a very similar setup where we have the base map and the legend associated with that, as well as the different zones. So on this property, and everybody's is going to be completely different. You'll probably find on smaller properties that you do not have 5 zones. This, I believe, is a couple of acres. Yeah, so almost 2 acres. So we have 1 through 5, and obviously zone 1 is the heart of human activity here, and zone 5 is sort of untouched wilderness, we'll call it, or untouched wooded area. If you're in an area where you're getting where that's your native habitat. And so often I'll see zone 5 in an urban site, and that is just extremely rare. I don't think there's many urban sites that are, say, a small lot that have untouched forest in them. I suppose all of them should, you know, in an ideal world, but they don't. So don't worry if you're going through this process and you're only, say, finding 3 zones, and that's often the case in an urban setting. You only have zone 1, 2, and 3. So don't worry that you have to create these other 2 zones. On a larger site, you definitely will. And some large project sites, the majority is a zone 5. So this is, again, very much like the microclimate map. We want to have all the areas of the map covered. And then here you end up with a little SWOT analysis that's kind of derived from this whole process. So as you went through here, what strengths and weaknesses did you come across, and opportunities and threats? So you may not have a threat, but you undoubtedly will come up with a few strengths, weaknesses, opportunities anyhow. So, and then there's a little note to put in here if you wish, or a conclusion, and then your Q&A form if you want to go that route. Yeah, so that is a really quick snapshot of Lesson 4's assignment. If we go to the template file itself, it's not going to be remarkably different than what we were looking at. And this is a nice template to work from, no doubt of that. So graphically, it'll be pretty sharp when it's all filled in. And the same with the current zones. And then, of course, all of this is fascinating when we get to the end of the course and we're doing our final design, and we then look at the new zone map and how that compares to the current zones. And it may not change remarkably. And on the other hand, there may be some significant changes to it. So let us just go to the Q&A form here. Doesn't look like anybody has put any questions. Oops. No, that's the right one. Okay, that's great. All right. So does anybody have anything they want to comment in or ask at all with regards to lesson 4? We're all feeling pretty good about that. Okay, well, that is excellent. Yeah, well, I tell you what, maybe what we'll do is I can just give you a quick tour of what we've been up to. It's always interesting seeing what other people are doing. Just share my screen here. And I may or may not have shown you some of these images already, but I will, because we have 2 classes going on, sometimes it's difficult to remember all the slides that I've shown. But this is an interesting little project we've been involved with at our home since the end of September. And what we did, we used to have quite a large pond and patio area here. And we put that in about 20 years ago. And over the last few years, we actually got an invasive, I guess it's a subtropical invasive aquatic plant that we purchased unknowingly from a nursery, and it went into this new pond, and over the course of a couple of years, it completely took over. And, we did our best to manage it, but it really dominated. So we knew we had to do something drastic, and we decided to tear out the pond and the liner and all the rock. Some of it you can see here, and start over. So we were going to actually take this and create a very large irrigation pond. But we decided that during our exploratory dig, when we hit some hard pan here very, very early, that we were going to shift gears a little bit. So we ended up putting in a rain garden of sorts. It's a really large infiltration basin. So I won't bore you with some of these videos, but basically we had an excavator in here to create different benches and enlarge the area. So we ended up, let me just get a little further along here. You're getting a sense here of what we're doing. Traditionally rain gardens would have 3 different zones to them. So we'd have a zone 1, and I don't want to confuse you with the zone map that we just covered, but, and this is not related to it at all, but in a rain garden, zone 1 is the wettest area, an area that may be underwater for most of the winter or much of the winter. And then it has to also handle some dry periods during the summer months. So it's actually quite a tricky little spot to plant. But the next zone, as we come up the edge of the rain garden, is zone 2, and its crown, the crown of the plant is above that flood height, so it would never be submerged completely, but it will have access to some of that water and nutrient during the growing season. Let me just get to the next image here. So what we did, we're not quite finished with our excavation, but we set our overflow height. So if you do make a rain garden, you want to ensure you have an overflow. If this area gets too much water during this winter months, we want it to have somewhere to go rather than just to keep building in here. So that was part of our initial process, and we had excavated out all the material. Not sure if I have a good picture of that. And then we started laying down topsoil. So we have about a 1.5 feet, plus or minus a couple inches there on the base. There's my wife, Angela, spreading soil. And you can see that we filled the base, and then we started placing soil in this upper bench. And this is really the main driving, well, one of the main driving forces with this project is I wanted to have an edible medicinal planting around this edge that did not need any irrigation once it has been established. Let's see here. So that's overflow. Again, this is how we placed an overflow in here, just a little catch basin. Often, and I've done this before, we've just had an overflow that was not any part of a catch basin, that was just sort of a spillway that went off of the rain garden itself. So you don't have to necessarily use a catch basin on this project. It made sense to us because we want to reuse this water. So once this hits its maximum flood height and we get excess water, we're going to send that to another part of our landscape. And then one part of this project was taking water that right where the tripod is here, that's our parking area going into our house. And unfortunately, when our house was built, that's quite a low spot in our landscape. So we do get water accumulating there quite a bit during the winter months, and we've had to manage that in the past, and it hasn't really been 100% satisfactory. So what we're doing is we put a, let me just show you. I'm not sure where that, there we go. So we put a catch basin that can take some vehicle traffic right at the edge, and probably 2 to 3 inches below the grade of the parking. And we run that all the way down here with about 1% fall. So for every 100 feet of run, it would have a foot of fall. So the water's moving nicely. And then we've also, it's turned the corner here from the driveway. We're also tapping into a ditch that's running at the top of our property and bringing that as well. We're bringing in a water line. So just doing as many things as we can. And then we head to the rain garden, and what we're doing here is we're terminating our pipes about this location, and we're going to have that water run on the surface from the pipe to the rain garden itself. So we get a little bit of, well, just a little bit of enjoyment in watching the water. And this is not finished in that picture, but it gives you an idea of where we're at. So we kind of fast forward ahead, and we've got some plantings in here. And this is our zone 1 plantings. We haven't started the zone 2 yet. You can also see that I did not finish up my inlet work correctly before we had our first rain event. So we have a little bit of erosion happening here. And this is very easy to repair just with a bunch of this cobble. So it's called kind of armoring this inlet. And we've done that now. So we're not getting erosion. Water's just running over the rocks as it comes in. And you can see the water runs along the base of these blasted rock from the ditch and from our parking area. And then that's what we just threw this in as some reinforcement for that inlet. And it's no doubt a little bit difficult to put this all into context because I'm kind of jumping around with images here, but yeah, this is all we need to stop that erosion from occurring. And the one thing I haven't done is mulch this. So that's the next important thing. We've got to get some composted mulch on here. The plant material I've chosen was the red Osler dogwood. It's a native shrubby dogwood that is quite happy to be in a damp setting. These are native sedges, and then this is a sedge that is a cultivar. So it's non-native, but very similar in its habit. It's a little shorter than the native. And I'm actually not sure I want to keep this native one. We'll see how it behaves. It may run around quite a bit, but we'll see. Yeah, so that's what we've been up to, and it's exciting to see water moving. And again, you can see what happens when we get a reasonable rain event. This starts to flood. And during the winter, I expect that flooding will go up. We're allowing for about 9 inches of flooding to happen, and then it'll hit that catch basin and overflow and be sent away. And the whole idea is that this water, after the rain stops, will infiltrate into the ground within about 24 hours. Let me just show you. So what you don't see here is beyond this line, we have an orchard downhill from this. There's a plum tree here. There's a big apple. There's, this orchard we planted over 2 decades ago. And this side of the orchard is very dry. It's a very dry part of our property. So this whole infiltration basin is going to do nothing but benefit all these plants downhill. It'll be very, very interesting to see how they respond over the next couple of years. So that's a little bit about what we're doing here. This is another thing I just wanted to pop in, is this great little app that we use quite a bit. It's called Sunseeker, and you can get this for your, I believe, for any phone. It doesn't have to necessarily be a Mac. I believe it works on an Android as well. And it's a brilliant software. So we use this quite a bit when we're trying to determine where we could say some of our microclimates are, where we are getting the most amount of light. So in this example, we were trying to figure out where we're going to place some new squash mounds. And we had an idea in the back of our head where the best location is, but we wanted to verify that with Sunseeker. So the Sunseeker has a couple of modes to it. One is a 3D mode. So you can activate the camera and you point it up into the sky. And what it does is it shows you in this case, the summer solstice sun path. Down here is the fall in green. And what you don't see is the winter solstice line. So you get all three lines as well as your current sun path. So the sun path of the day that you're taking this, and you can see here it was November 12th and the time and the exact coordinates. And we wanted to see how much light. So bang, we can see, well, about 7:30, we're starting to get light in the spot. And then we move over to the other portion of the sky, and you can just see the summer or the winter solstice here, and here we have fall. And of course, again, in the summer, we can see we're getting light from basically 7:30 to 6 p.m. where I am standing. So that was very interesting. And the same thing for another space here. We get earlier light, get it at 6 and almost a full 12 hours. So that really helped us determine where we are going to get the most amount of light, because we had our squash. Again, the context is really difficult here, but we had a squash mound up here this year. And we found that it did really well until we got into this later in the summer towards the fall solstice, and the light level fell rapidly here, and our yield was significantly diminished. So we are changing the location of that. And again, this is the same idea. So this is a great tool, and you can see how graphical it is, of course, and then you can take a snapshot of that when you're taking a look at it. We use this for greenhouse location, try and find your best spot depending on what you're trying to do with the greenhouse. And this, of course, this yellow line here is the current day. So you can see we're creeping towards that December 21st mark. So yeah, that was just a little bit of, I don't think there's, yeah, that's the roof of my house. Yeah, that's about it for my show and tell for that. So open to any discussion anybody wants to get into in terms of whether, oh, thank you, John. You're quite welcome. Happy to share share things that we're doing on this property and on other projects. So I don't have any other images sort of set up to show you. What I could do is just give you, I tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a snapshot of a design we're working on right now as well. Melissa had a question here. Want to know if I had any experience working with the conservation easement and its restrictions. No, I don't, Melissa. In BC, Canada, it's a little bit different in that we have easements and riparian setbacks, and they tend to be bylaws that are worked into local areas rather than, say, county-wide. So they're very, very clear what you're allowed to do. And basically with riparian areas where I live, you're not allowed to modify anything within that space. And it's often a 15-meter setback from the middle or the edge of a riparian area on both sides. And you can add native material to it. You can attempt to, improve it, but they do not want you to be excavating or doing anything destructive to it. Are you having challenges working with this this group, Melissa, or is it are you kind of trying to get a feel? Yeah, similar limitations. Yeah, and you may find, I know where I am, they're very they're not bending on it, right? So natives only, yeah. Yeah, and no structures, absolutely. So that it can be tricky to work in, but for instance, when we're setting up a drawing, and it has a riparian area going through it, that's something that we designate. So your clients need a bridge. So that may still be possible. It may be you have to just work within the guidelines of the conservation easement. They may have some allowance for that. And the bridge, depending on the span, if it's just a footbridge, that may be quite simple to do. Is it just for foot traffic, Melissa, or is it? Yeah. So that may be quite doable. It may be the materials you use and the way you go about it may be such that it has to be quite what's the right word now? Very very gentle on the landscape. So they may not allow, like concrete footings or anything like that. You may have to use wood only, and in such a way that it blends in well with the environment and has a very, very small impact. But you'd really have to get into a dialogue with whoever is representing that group in your area and just get a feel for whether they're going to allow something like that to improve access. And they may be quite understanding about it. So it's worth exploring. I've not had to do that in the past, but there is usually a little bit of give and take with that. So I see. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a tricky one. Yeah, it's unusual. Let me just show you something that plays into that a little bit. I'm just pulling up a drawing here. Okay, I'll share my screen. And this is, let's see here. This will probably not relate at all to what you guys are doing, but this is a little farm job, little farm design we're doing for a couple that just bought property, about an hour from us. It's not very large. It's only about 7 or 8 acres, but they're trying to make a go of taking this ALR land, this agricultural land, and generating some output. It used to be a small butchery, actually. They would process chickens on this site, but they want to put in a food forest and get an orchard going. Anyhow, I won't get into that too deeply here, but this is their base plan that we've started working on. And so in relation to what you're talking about, they have a riparian zone going through their property, quite a significant drainage, we'll call it channel. And then right near the bottom of the property where we have this purple designation, that is a riparian, that is the official riparian zone that's been designated by the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District. So we can do whatever we want uphill, or not even uphill, but beyond the purple area, but nothing within this except native. So we don't plan to do anything here. What you don't see on the map is this drainage goes under the road in a culvert and pops out into the neighboring the property across the road, and it has a significant riparian setback to it. So for whatever reason, this part of our client's property does not have that designation, and that is a really handy thing, because we want to try and make the most use of the water flowing through here that we can. And we're actually looking at pumping water out of this seasonal creek, and we're going to store that in a pond. So that's our initial idea anyways. But you can see, let me see here, a better view of that. So here's a LiDAR hillshade projection. So this comes from LiDAR data that we can process. And you can see in this image the drainage or riparian area and how it does become more significant as it moves under the road and goes through this property and then again another property, and then we're into, you know, a substantial creek here. This is one of the projects we're working on right now, and we generate land capability maps that's based on slope. So that tells us what we can typically do on that land. And you can see quite a bit of this space is flat, has good capabilities. We put together keyline cultivation patterns, and then this sort of map here showing water flow patterns. So how water flows across the site. And we're going to get into that when we get to lesson 5. So then the next lesson is a bit of a tricky one. Lesson 5 can be a little bit tricky, but it's sort of vital to the design process as we're going forward. And then this was an overall land capability map of the immediate area. And you can see there's good agricultural potential here and a lot of water flowing through the space. So that is basically part of our, what we call our geography layer. We just started looking at the water, where we're looking at watersheds, and this is what we're going to be doing in lesson 5. We're going to look at large watersheds, which is here, the macro, and nothing's labeled here because this is under production right now. And then we look at the micro watershed, so all of the land that is above the project site that can potentially influence it. And we calculated that's, the space is about 25 acres. Yeah, so that's a little snapshot. I'll show you another thing here too while I got you. It's just out of interest. Sorry, I'm just firing up the software here. All right. Let's see if we can get the same. Just showing you kind of where we derived our original data from. So we use, on occasion, we use a software called QGIS, and it is quite incredible. So what we did here was we have in British Columbia, and I know in Oregon you certainly do, we have a LiDAR, public LiDAR depository, so to speak, that the public can access the LiDAR data, and it comes in at a very raw format, and you have to manipulate it. And I'm just trying to find, there we go. So yeah, there's all these various layers you can see here that we work on and then control the visibilities of it. we have two different segments here. So we're seeing contours. These are 1 foot contours of the surrounding area. And I have the Google Earth hybrid map in the background there, which is a great reference. And our project site was in and around here. And we have a boundary. There's our boundary. And then we have our 1 foot contours. So it takes a little bit of time, but we extract all this information, we create the contours, and then we have to, as you can see when you zoom in here, there are artifacts that you can see, especially if I turn this off, all of these little artifacts, and that gets removed in a later process. And we ultimately want to create what you're seeing here. And this is this digital terrain model. And this allows us to extract those contours that you were seeing. Let's see if that, in that. And then we clip what we want to use and export that into our other software here. So pretty cool tool. It has a huge learning curve, and luckily I'm on on the Agrarian platform. They have a QGIS online course, and so every time I start diving into this and don't know what I'm doing, I can reference that. But it's not an easy learning curve, but a really, well, it's a free software, open source, and of course LiDAR data is regularly available. So that is pretty cool. Yeah. So that's a little bit about what we've been up to lately, and trying to think of another thing I can show you guys here. Got a couple minutes left. There is one thing here I'll show you. And feel free, if you have a question or anything you'd like to shoot out, please feel free to do so. Kind of into bonus time here, that not part of our regular schedule. Just going to open up an interesting thing on Google Earth Pro here just to show you as well. It's a resource that I recently discovered. And I have so much on my Google Earth here that it just takes forever to load. It's not the most stable software in the world, but it's a really good communication tool. Here we go. Just spend a couple minutes on this and then we'll be wrapping up for the day. Again, there's a lot of resources on Google Earth, and one I found via the Agrarian platform the other day was a LiDAR index of Vancouver Island, where I live. So I have to turn that on. So basically now, if I zoom in on a part of the island here that has LiDAR coverage, it's showing me in these blocks, and I just click on that, I then get the option of downloading pre-done digital terrain models and all these other models. And the digital terrain is the one I'm after. But this is all part of all part and parcel of Google Earth Pro. So there are a lot of add-ons that you can plunk into this that can really help you out. So pretty much anywhere we work on Vancouver Island right now that has habitats, we can easily access some really good quality LiDAR data, so we can get contour information which is great. It's only good if we know the site hasn't had any disturbance since the satellite passed over, and we get that information. It's usually a couple years old, but anyhow, that's a little bit of bonus material for you. Yeah, last call here for any questions for anybody. Happy to dive into any questions anybody might have, but if not, we'll call it a day, and well, call it a morning anyways, and look forward to seeing your lesson 4 assignments next week. And then we get into water, which is one of my favorite layers, and really going to enjoy seeing what you guys come up with. But definitely encourage everybody to come back in a couple of weeks for the lesson 5 Q&A. There will be a little bit to cover there, and we can hopefully answer any questions that you might have regarding that. But thank you very much, everybody, for your time today, and really look forward to seeing your assignments next week. So if you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate. You can drop me a note or post it on the Q&A. There is a question and answer discussion board that we have set up. But yeah, so enjoy your week, and thank you again for all your time.